So you are in the market for a heat tool, and after a quick online search you have found that there are two different types. You have one looking like a hair dryer and one looking like a torpedo. They both dry paints and mediums, and they both melt embossing powder, but they're not the same. They're similar, but they're not the same. There are a few unique differences between the two and how they work, and we'll discuss those. Hey there, welcome to my channel. I am Teresa, I'm a mixed media artist, and on this channel I focus on product knowledge, skills and techniques to make you a confident creator. Because I strongly believe that if you understand the products that you are working with and the tools that you use with them and the techniques that you use with them, then you can literally create anything. So heat tools, which one should you get? Well, it all depends what you want to do. If you are a mixed media artist, a watercolorist, someone that does art journaling, junk journaling, any types of crafts, your need would probably be for something that dries paints and mediums and inks and such, and glue. Yes, if you are a scrapbooker or a card maker and you do a lot of stamping and embossing, then you would need something that melts embossing powder. So if both of these do those things, doesn't matter which one you get. Well, actually yes and no. Sorry for leaving you slightly confused, but don't worry. I will explain the unique differences between these two heat tools so that you have a better understanding which one of the two will actually suit your needs, or you might just decide to get both. So let's talk heat-wise. Heat-wise, they get to the same temperature, both of them. The big difference comes in with how they deliver the heat. For this demo, I am comparing the Ranger Heated Craft Tool, yes, and the Universal Crafts Heat Gun. These are the two that I have. These are the two that I love and use. A lot of brands make something very similar to this. There's only the Ranger brand that makes this specific one. Okay, so let's get into it. This is the Ranger heat tool. It is primarily for crafting. It's called a craft tool. This is for drying paints, glues, inks, mediums, watercolor paint, anything that you want to dry that you're working on an art journal page or a canvas or something like that. Okay, it diffuses heat. It's got a very low airflow rate, which makes it a lot quieter. It's got a nice wide nozzle which distributes the heat to quite a large area, so it's almost like it radiates heat. There's not a lot of like air coming out of the front. One of the best features of this one is that if you are working with embossing powders and you've done a piece of embossing and you want to go do some inks and paints over the top of that, it won't remelt the embossing powder very quickly because it takes that much longer to melt embossing powder, which gets me into the one thing that I would call a con. It's not really a con, but it takes a lot longer to melt embossing powders, which you use to your advantage when you've already got embossing powders on a product and you do want to go and add inks and dry them. Now to the heat gun, the Universal Crafts heat gun or embossing gun. This is a very popular shape. You'll see a lot of different brands make something that looks like this torpedo shape one. It melts embossing powders very quickly. It's what it's made for. The reason being is because of the shape of the nozzle. It directs that heat into a specific area, creates like a little hot spot, and that's why it can melt embossing powders so quickly. It also has a much higher fan speed, which blows more air out of the front. So you have to be careful with like chunky embossing powders, it will blow it away, but there's ways to get around that, and I have a video for that. The only downside or con that I will mention about this specific one is that it does blow your paints. Like if you have watercolors or inks or stuff that you're trying to dry, it does blow it around on the substrate. That could be the look that you are going for, then that is fine. Cons or downsides that I've mentioned here isn't actually big problems. They're just something that you need to be aware of, and that is the reason why I do own both of these. As a mixed media artist, I enjoy having both of these. If I want to dry paints and mediums and inks and glues, I grab my trusty heat tool. If I want to emboss embossing powder, I grab my embossing gun. It's as easy as that. I really enjoy having both. Okay, so now you ask, what about those torpedo shaped ones? You've seen it on the internet, it's got 2 fan speeds. Well, what I've noticed personally is that they still have this nozzle which directs the heat into a specific area. When I dry paints and inks, I actually prefer having the larger opening, the larger nozzle that directs the heat over a larger area. You have less risk of bubbling your paints and glues. That said, if you just keep this further away and keep it moving, you won't have that problem. So now you're still asking, but which one should I get? I don't know if I want to get both of them. Well, I always say get what you can afford or what is readily available. For a very long time, I only had the heat tool and I did everything with it until I had budget to buy an embossing gun. And then when I burned out my first heat tool, I only had my embossing gun and I used it for everything and it worked perfectly fine until I had budget to get another one of these heat tools. So yes, you can definitely very easily, very happily get away with either or, but I just prefer having both of them. Personal preference. And now I guess you want to know why I burned out my first heat tool so that you don't make the same mistake. Well, all I can say is buy the correct version. What do I mean by that? Okay, so the Ranger heat tool is available on a 110 volt plug thingy for American market and a 220 volt plug adapter for the European market. So here in Australia, we use 220 volt in our electricity system. So I got the European plug. I had to get a little plug adapter, but they're very inexpensive and readily available. So just make sure you get the right Ranger heat tool for your country's electricity supply. That's important. I hope this was helpful and that it gave you a good idea of what you would need for your specific way that you craft. You might want just something to dry inks and paints, or you might want something to emboss, or you could just get away with one of them, or you can decide to get both. It's all up to you. If you have any questions and there was something that's not completely clear, drop them in the comments section and I will help as best I can. Thank you for watching and keep creating.